the kind of freedom we're craving for and asking for, and the degrees of economic freedoms we need now, we never needed them so badly. The role of the architect is not to impose a formal order, preconceived, but to congenially articulate this emergent network of relations. We have the computational revolution, the flexible specialization, network society, and therefore I think to express that, we should also express the frontier, 21st century everything. And the 21st century everything, we need degrees of freedom which would never existed.
This episode of the Free Cities podcast is brought to you by Veritas Villages. Now, Veritas Villages are freedom-oriented, energy self-sufficient luxury communities designed for people who want to enjoy peace of mind and real freedom in today's unpredictable world. Join a community of like-minded neighbours who value privacy and independence in a place where you can use Bitcoin, including for the purchase of your property. www.veritasvillages.com/free cities for more info, and in the meantime, enjoy the conversation. Can we start with just how you got involved with the Free Cities movement? I know you've been dipping your toes in and out for quite a long time now. You've got connections with Prospera, with Liberland, with a lot of the projects.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So first of all, how I became a libertarian through the 2008 crisis. And a lot of people shifted left, became anti-capitalist. But I had been there from the mid-80s into the mid-90s and moved out of that. So I wasn't going to be tempted back into left-wing ideology. So when I discovered the Austrian School of Economics, because their explanation of the crisis made a lot of sense to me. And people like Peter Schiff, predicting it, and somebody like Tom Woods explaining it, and then diving rapidly into picking up the readings, writings, and I discovered the Mises Institute and so on, and the works of Rothbard. But I'd already been familiar to some extent with Hayek's works. So that's where I started. And it applies beautifully to the built environment, because in the development process, urban development process, we don't have much market process left. It's very, very heavily kind of controlled and regulated and politicized, and to the detriment of development. It basically leads to some kind of paralysis. And in the end, the housing crisis, for instance, we have affordability crisis. It can be traced back to that. And it's all rent-seeking, and it's rather than proper competition, entrepreneurship, discovery process, none of this exists in the built environment in the advanced countries, for instance, Britain. Now, so I was very intrigued so I was a full-on libertarian, also understood that it's very important in the urban development process to liberalize. I just heard about Liberland, and being founded, I was intrigued, and more or less immediately in the first year of founding, I flew to Prague and visited Vít Jelička, the president and founder of Liberland, and we had a whole afternoon on his roof terrace, debating, discussing, and so that's where I connected. And then I went to also to visit Liberland. I mean, you couldn't go there, but there was a Liberland conference close by in Serbia, and Eric Brimmen picked me up, was there at the time consulting Vít and New Way Capital trying to help Vít to negotiate deals. And so I met with Eric, and we also learned about Prospera at the time, and through that also came in touch with Titus. And also he had just published a book around that time, Free Private Cities, which I was eagerly gobbling up. And then we got involved with Eric. We were in parallel working with Vít. We helped him to organize some architectural competitions, and then we developed the metaverse for Liberland. I went to several of his conferences, and I also connected up with Eric and Titus, visited Prospera, and we did studies, actually did urban development studies for Eric, and then also, more detailed housing proposals with a very new concept of kind of market exploration through co-creation, which is something you couldn't do in Europe because of the planning restrictions. So that's why I got into it. And I was at the time also been going around speaking at many libertarian conferences, Students for Liberty in various places in the US, LibertyCon and so on, and met with people and became part of a network.
So here's where I find it really interesting, because you're the did you invent parametric design or did you?
Parametric design. So I coined the phrase parametricism, and recognizing that this is something very profound and fundamental. I call it a new epochal style for the 21st century, and that was my role. And also kind of canonizing to some extent what has been achieved over a number of years. By that time, it was nearly 15 years in, some kind of wave, a whole generation of architects investing in these new computational design concepts, but also the physiognomy, morphology of these compositions and urban plans became kind of radically different and new, much more adaptive, much more organic, through the kind of techniques of integration, adaptation, and this coincided with the idea of the so-called urban renaissance, where the period in the mid-20th century, there was this kind of suburbanization, greenfield factories, sleeping cities, and not much communication required in the city because everything was command and control planned through big corporates or the state. And you have this kind of this kind of flow back into the city with the beginnings of the knowledge economy through the computational and telecommunication revolution. And so that was, in architecture, meant more dynamism, more complexity, layering new onto old, and that had developed some kind of new transition, what I call transitional styles. Postmodernism came out of that so-called deconstructivism, and I was involved with that with Zaha Hadid, was one of the major forces of so-called deconstructivism, and out of that developed something which I later, in retrospect, called parametricism, which is quite distinct, but I think much more long-lasting. So postmodernism had 10, 15 years, deconstructivism 10 years, and then parametricism, we're now we're 30 years in. But the 2008 crisis took the steam out, because what was great in the period up to that, there was much more dynamism, development. There was the remarketization of a lot of development processes. And you had phenomena like Dubai and Europe, a lot of booming cities, and that energized the whole field. And it gave also younger voices, new voices, work to do. And the 2008 was a general moment of retrenchment, where you had the anti-capitalist flourish, where there wasn't work, where the schools of architecture also became kind of more politicized and anti-capitalist, and so that in a way took the steam out of this movement, parametricism. Unfortunately, because throughout the 90s and up to 2008, 9, 10, it was really the field seemed to be converging on this. And I mean, we kept going, and there's a number of other protagonists, a small hand of protagonists kept going, and we kept rolling out and maturing and developing, but it didn't deliver that kind of takeover of the field, similar to what the modernists, who started in the 1920s and into the 30s, then there was a disruption of the Second World War, but then post-war was rolling out throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and transformed the physiognomy of that planet all over. And so that didn't happen with parametricism. So we got this kind of strange retrenchment, going into retro styles, going into quiet, inconspicuous, and the field, the discipline itself, started more talk about social justice and sustainability and criticizing growth. There was I call it also some kind of woke takeover of the field, which hampered in a way the kind of optimistic, progressive in a positive sense, let's say, technology fueled advancement of urban life.
So, okay, God, there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Did I get that? Did I hear that right? That parametricism came out of a postmodernism. It kind of
it's a version. I mean, postmodernism injected some kind of degree of complexity, and there was this kind of idea of collaging motifs and integrating new over old, but it used traditional motifs.
They seem at odds
it
with
was a
each
kind
other.
of pop collaging with traditional architectural motifs, but you get something which is more lively and rich and varied than the modernism, which is this paradigm of endless repetition.
Yeah.
And so postmodernism started to be more playful and versatile, but with historical motifs. Then deconstructivism picked up the kind of versatility and complexity built up, but no longer with historical motifs, but with more abstract geometric elements. And so that was, I thought, an advance. And they had additional, let's say, compositional opportunities which postmodernism didn't have. And out of that, though, this wasn't, in my view, sustainable, because it became very quickly too complex and illegible. These composition they became kind of a, let's say, visual chaos nearly. So parametricism comes out of this ordering that chaos, but having the intricacy, versatility, adaptiveness of what we try to aim for in deconstructivism. But with the new tools, computational tools, we could do something which was more coherent and more legible, let's say.
Here's where when I was looking into all this is where my mind found a problem. And we should probably define parametricism before we go on. But basically, you've just said it there. Parametricism was a way of creating order out of chaos in a way you've just described.
That's right.
But I was under the impression that parametricism is more about a spontaneous evolution of something. They seem like they seem or like you mentioned Hayek and his spontaneous order, but they seem at odds with each other. You've got this formal regime deciding what's what, and then you've got a spontaneous order.
No, okay, I can resolve that. First of all, as we step back on a more general philosophical level, we looked at process of self-organization, spontaneous order, complexity theory, chaos theory, the way, for instance, a complex formation of eddies and flows and happens when the water flows across some rocks. These are lawfully, but they're quite complex and rich and adaptive. And they're not invented. You don't impose. You allow the various parameters and influences to come together and have a kind of self-organization. And that's something which Hayek could also use that phrase, because he was interested in these processes of self-organization, complexity theory, like cybernetics. So I think there's the connection right there. Now, when it comes to the spontaneous order of the city, what I'm arguing is this. We need to allow entrepreneurial freedom. We need land use should not be prescribed by any planning regime. I think that the people come together into the city by seeking out very particular connections and a multitude of connections, and they have to find each other. There needs to be the degree of freedom to associate and self-organize, what I call the co-location synergies. That's what you need, maximal entrepreneurial freedom. And then the role of the architect is not to impose a formal order, preconceived, but to congenially articulate this emergent network of relations by making these underlying connections, affiliation, what belongs together more or less legible, by articulating that, organizing that spatially and articulating this. So when you come into a site and you say, I wanted to be here because I wanted to be close to some of these neighbors, and so you establish then, not you come in with a preconceived form. You say I have to be adaptive because I want to make my entrances into my building line up with the entrances of the neighbors I want to connect to. I also want to formally affiliate to the buildings perhaps they have. There's a certain geometry, a certain path hitting my building. I allow this to continue in that direction, so that you see the building forms out of these relations, and parametricism allows for that. And that's the spirit. So it is some kind of spontaneous order, but it needs to be articulated. The profession, as has been, wasn't able to do that. It had a very rigid vocabulary and insisted on proportion, symmetry, a certain orthogonality. But often sites, for instance, are not orthogonal. So you can exploit with a pliable, amoeba-like kind of approach, you can fit yourself much better. And also, if they have different levels coming to your building, you can mediate. So these moves mean that we can trace and make visible the spontaneous order which emerges, and we don't imposing. Our view is that we have to, trace, follow, articulate the affiliations and connections, because that's why people come into the city, to have these connections, to be close to things they care about, but also to work together with things they choose to be next to. And sometimes, if everything is kind of visually chaotic, you don't understand what functions together. But if you formally affiliate and pick up some of the materiality, some of the geometry, some of the alignments and directions, you can kind of intuitively read this environment better. And that's our idea. And also to give, don't stuff also internal relations. Don't stuff everything which needs to be accommodated into a preconceived box, internally preconceived. No, you allow the requirements to push the envelope, to structure the internal relations without preconceived geometries.
So the metrics that they're based on, then they're preconceived, right? Aren't they?
Metrics. Well, okay. So,
as in parametricism. Can I just explain?
Yeah, sure,
can I tell you what I think? I'll tell you what I think it is.
Okay,
because I'm probably wrong.
Okay,
but parametricism is a design language based on algorithms. So you choose some algorithms, and then that forms the framework within which anything can spontaneously evolve.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are kind of preconceived ideas.
Yeah, there's always frameworks, but not only in parametricism. The point of parametricism is that the frameworks are more versatile, pliable. They have more input parameters, but also I can choose. They have many potential frameworks I could bring to bear. Compared to older styles, there's only one or two or three inverted commas frameworks to start with, and they have less pliability. So it's always comparative. You can't get away from what I call the formal a priori, the kind of framing set of categories. Even when you describe something, you come with a language. The question is: your language more versatile, expressive, subtle, adaptive, or is it more crude, simplistic, etc.? So my argument is parametricism has a more advanced, meaning sophisticated, pliable, expressive language. Also, more tools to pragmatically adapt. It's not only a question of expression, as of accommodation to pragmatic conditions, which are more complex. I mean, the previous and the old world, life in various institutions was more static. 9 to 5, you come and sit always in your same cell. At lunchtime, you go to the canteen, and after lunch, you go back. And then everybody streams out, and you don't need to have inter-awareness, inter-visibility, continuously recalibrating. You have maybe a few scheduled meetings, and that's much more dynamic now, particularly in the knowledge economy. So every day you need to make sure that you take note of what all the other moving parts are you plug into. And then you're kind of roaming around. You often have not a fixed desk. You're roaming around in different settings, detailitized space, for instance. and you have meetings with internal, external conditions. You also, right after work and in between work, you have lunch meetings, which are business meetings, maybe outside networking. After hours, you go to the pub or go to an exhibition opening or conference. So it is much more dynamic and interactive. And therefore the settings, you need to emphasize different things. You need to emphasize that you accommodate all these flows and relations, that people also have more legibility of all the other things going on, which might be relevant to them. That's why we have opening up the section, we have atria, intervisibility, interawareness, and we have more kind of fluid in different settings. You can quickly shift from one setting to another. It's not closed rooms. Once you sit in the closed rooms, and then you come open the door, there's an empty corridor, and you have to know where you're going. But if you're an open Bürolandschaft over many levels, you get a sense what's going, who's coming, who's going, and what might be relevant to you. And if you go to a Google campus, that's what it's like. Actually, at Google, people have 20% of the time free. You used to have to freely associate, set up teams, set up projects, because you can no longer command and control from above. It's moving too fast. Knowledge is dispersed. Work is self-directed. So we are creating the environment for that. And it's not corporate headquarters and factories on the green field, which just follow a blueprint, you know. So it's continuously rewriting the blueprint, and that's what we want to. We want to accommodate that, and express that, and facilitate that. And of course, you have always some kind of, you come with a kind of systematic systems framework, but there are many competing ones, and they update quickly. So there's not one frame which we stuff everything into. It's like the endless species of nature, you know. None of them is arbitrary. They start arbitrarily, but then they adapt, they evolve, they exploit a niche, and things in nature. These species, they collocate and synergize and feed off each other, and that's the way I see the world of the spontaneous order of the knowledge economy.
Something we end up discussing a fair bit on this podcast in relation to free cities, because they tend to be located often in brand new places.
Yeah.
Which I was interested to hear your take on that, because when you look historically, a lot of cities they amass around something, normally a resource, and then they seem to evolve over a period of time. One of the kind of potential problems with free cities is you kind of have to plant them in one place and make them. So do you think you can build a full city from scratch, or do you think you have to sort of start it and then let the market decide what happens to the place?
Yeah, you definitely have to let the market come in, but also you need to seed it with something which already has the rough general features. I wouldn't start with a grid of 100 equal blocks. I would start with something which is a default differentiation, a range, economies of scope, so that you can have small, medium, large enterprises, but you also allow them to connect. So you can kind of fuse blocks into allow for bridges, etc. Yes, you can fully invent on the drawing board, but when you come to seeding a city and making first sketches, you need to invite people to something which they can imagine. But then there's something already, you know, there will be updates and there will be transformations and flexibilities. You have to be very agile on that, and we can do that because we don't destroy the figure by making changes. If you come a very rigid neoclassical symmetrical axial plan, if you adapt something, it will be out of whack and shows as a mistake. That's not the way we would design. So it's inherently flexible. We thought this through also with respect, for instance, something like Liberland or Prospera. So we're saying we can start in parallel with some kind of curated center. It remains adaptable. Then we have other districts where we're trying to say, okay, come in, and we let the group of owners who started to invest, they can kind of arrange amongst themselves how to curate some rules, because you might need some rules to contain negative externalities. But then you also should be proposing a kind of free-for-all, where you come with the risk. I'm placing something here. I'm unrestrained, but I therefore cannot control what happens next to me. But I would trust that somebody next to me might be here because they want to have something to do with us. So we be synergetic. But you can't predict. So there's a bit of more risk, but also more opportunity in the free-for-all. So I was opting for a kind of mixture of regimes in parallel, a central curated where the managers and owners, let's say the free cities investors, make propositions, and it is more predictable that you come in here and we will roughly in this environment. But then, of course, you also rely on the fact that it is being filled out by the planned kind of functions. And you wanted to say there will be a conference here, you have to actually find somebody who's hosting conferences, unless the city developer wants to himself to become a conferencing company or exhibition company. So there's pros and cons. And the way we looked at it, we're saying we start on 3 or 4 fronts simultaneously, and then let's see what catches on. And then remain agile to adapt as we go along. So yeah, it's definitely something which you can't do overnight. What is very important though is that you start with a critical mass. Everybody waits for everybody else to be there to have the network starting. So the network effects, like with any company which relies on network effects, a city is relying on that. The difficulty is to kind of bootstrap that out of nothing, particularly in a remote location. So that's why I think it's very important to have things like a metaverse version, or to build a community ahead of settling. So there's relations, there's expectations, there's plans which have been shared and recycled. And we developed this tool of a co-creation virtually, a digital twin evolving, which you can already use for communications, for conferences like Liberland. The Liberland metaverse, for instance, played that role and wanted to play that role. And I think that's important because the difficulty is, as I said, yes, it will always start relatively small, but it has to be kind of rapidly grow to a certain extent that you're not isolated. I mean, the good aspect is that you also can be plugged into a telecommunication network, but you also want to have things happening at site. And even if it's just to share certain facilities, but also to have collaborators. So that's why I also thought it was important to try in the curation to target certain industries first, where you feel. And, when you open a new building system, you can say, I'm calling this a media center because I wanted to not randomly have any tenants which have nothing to do with each other. I want media companies here. So you have to play a little bit. I want to kind of reserve these for media companies. Try to find and bring some media companies. That will then bring other media companies. And then you have something, you don't need to be very large to have critical mass of co-location and synergy. That's, I think, a strategy which I would emphasize. You need to kind of niche or have some kind of, in the world division of labor, some kind of specialization, so that you don't need to you have 10 different seats, which each of them lacks critical mass. And the relevance of these to each other is insufficiently strong. So that's the tough task. And sometimes you have to hold it a little bit longer and rather than giving up too quickly, and it becomes a kind of random sampling of anybody who somehow feels to. Of course, so that's the kind of thing which, and I think Prospera has been doing that with respect to, for instance, crypto and certain things which make sense there, like innovative health tourism and health innovations. So I think that's important, and that's the entrepreneurial task, and we are very alert to that, and we then could help to support that. As architects, we're not writing these briefs and programs. But I would highly recommend, your point is very true, that it will have to emerge. And if, for instance, the health tourism takes on much more than the crypto, which might have different requirements, then you need to also be able to pivot or recalibrate the priorities and let this emerge. Because we know blueprints into the long future are vulnerable, particularly in such dynamic times.
I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to tell you about what I think is one of the most interesting real-world freedom projects that we've come across recently. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I'm always looking for things that actually exist, not the concepts, not the renderings, but real projects where people are already building the future. And this brings me to the Reef Resort, developed by the seasteading company ArcPad, founded, of course, by Mitchell Suchner, who many of you will remember was the winner of the Innovation Award at the 2025 Free Cities Conference. The Reef Resort, as far as we're aware, is the world's first operational seasteading resort. It's located just off the coast of Samal Island in the Philippines, where ArcPad currently operates 14 floating units available through Airbnb and other platforms, a project that has already hosted thousands of guests in both their accommodation and floating restaurant. Now, here's the development that will be especially interesting to listeners of this podcast. ArcPad is planning a second reef resort, this time off the coast of Prospera in Honduras, one of the most important free cities projects in the world, and construction is intended to align with the 2026 Free Cities Conference. So this is where the opportunity comes for you. You can now pre-purchase ownership in the Prospera Reef Resort. Ownership is available either outright or through fractional shares, allowing you to purchase from as little as 1% up to full ownership. Your ownership percentage determines your usage rights, your share of rental income from the eco-resort operations, and your voting power in property decisions. This also gives you the opportunity, of course, to be part of a pioneering ocean-based development within the Free Cities ecosystem. Full units at the Prospera site start from $95,000, but with fractional ownership available, you can participate at whatever level suits you. If you'd like to explore this opportunity, I've included a link in the show notes where you can register your interest and access the pre-purchase information. If you're interested in free cities, frontier living, and the future of ocean-based communities, then this is a chance to get involved at the ground floor. Seasteading is no longer just an idea. It's happening, and now it's coming to Prospera. So, is it fair to say you still design using parametricism?
Oh yeah.
Right. So is there a specific visual language to it then? Because when I think about, at least my sort of limited knowledge of Zaha Hadid buildings is, they've all got that look, which is a parametricism look. So does that mean a free city needs a specific architectural language?
What I think a lot of people appreciate, first of all, yes, because the look is not the immediate intent. The look is an outcome of a rational and adaptive process. And it's interesting, you can recognize it, but it's at the same time more versatile than all the other styles put together. It's a bit like you always will recognize whether a form is an organic form, let's say, or a natural form, inorganic or organic, rather than a mechanical form, right? Even though there's so many different natural emerged forms, like inorganic or organic nature, you recognize this isn't an invented, mechanical piece of equipment. So that's sometimes the puzzle where people think, oh, it's recognizable, that's why it's in inverted commas all the same. On a very abstract level, it is all the same, it remains recognizable, but it's like the infinite forms of nature. So it's much more versatile and rich in variation, although recognizable. It has one label, and it's not actually recognizable as Zaha Hadid, not to the extent I would say, then I wouldn't be proud of that. Recognized as parametricism, I'm proud of that, it should be. And there are many others who are coming in, since we're such a dominant mothership of this movement in terms of the large-scale operation, who consistently work that. It is often kind of conflated and associated. But there are many other authors, and some of the major corporations also author projects like this, but not consistently. So I would say, yes, there is a language in that broadest sense, and also it means that it gives a certain identity to a place. So what people dislike today is that there seems to be a lack of identity in different places. They all start to look the same, but if you look closely, it's not the same. But you can't get the gist or essence of the place. I call that garbage spill urbanization. If you spill out various cans of trash, they all have quite different ingredients. But when, as a field of trash, they all look the same. Because you can't, it is amorphous. It has no form, shape, order, logic you can hook onto. Even though the one has a Coke can and a milk carton and a crumbled paper, and this one has plastic pieces and no Coke, but smashed glass bottles. They in the end, we respond to them, well, it's all equally white noise disorder, and so that is where we have to a bit reflect what we think is sameness, what is difference, and we crave for identity. And with parametricism, it's very clear that we can build up, not preconceived. Every town would evolve in a path-dependent way because it starts with certain conditions, it has certain materials, certain climatic conditions. There's something which gives it a particular identity. And if you work in parametricism, you meant to affiliate as things come together because they wanted to be together. And they have a certain look and feel and sets of relations. It builds up. And this might also include ingredients which were there. You know, whether it was a valley, a river, an island, whether it's tropic climate or northern Nordic climate, all of this will, these parameters and aspects will imprint. So you end up with recognizable places. Very similar in a way to the vernacular, where you had to, through the constraints and parameters and with less blueprinting, but evolving village forms, town forms, often they're concentric, not because somebody invented a concentric plan, because you start with some kind of fortification, and then the first ring of houses around that, second ring, third ring, and then the whole thing is kind of locked onto a river on one side, so it has this asymmetry and orientation to one side. So these things evolve, and in a way that's parametricism does it too. So the vernacular kind of settlement structures, they have not been planned, they accrue, but they have character and logic because there are certain regular parameters which imprint themselves and have generate unity and the right variety relative to conditions. And that's the paradigm. Of course, in today's world, we are operating at a different scale with more versatility, but the principle of, let's say, self-organization, spontaneous order is still there.
How does that fit in then? I know in the Free Cities movement, like Titus is a good example. There are a lot of people that idolize, for example, a beautiful European period city, say something.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people wish to sort of recreate that, mainly base it around a square, use period vernacular, you know. And what do you think about that?
So my response to this is, they're quite right to, if I had the different environments we pervade, that there's something, a sense of place, a sense of coherence, versus that jumble of incongruent buildings which have no rhyme, no reason, no relation. Because in the current world, it is actually a failing of our discipline, but as well as the kind of randomness of a land use plan, where you have to can build this which is prescribed here, and there's no, therefore no immediate synergies, but also the planners prescribe too much, so you can't articulate. Then architects try to bring their own kind of relatively self-indulgent ideas, and the discipline is quite fragmented. I would also choose the historic city. As I said earlier, there's like the vernaculars, but also then the kind of later centuries where architecture was involved, but mostly involved only in the primary buildings, and the bulk of the building was still kind of tradition-bound building, vernacular. These are more lovely, more places with more identity, And also, as I said, the convergence back to the historic centers, to the cities, this kind of more dense life, is also better adaptive now. And also this idea of pedestrianized cities, where you have to connect up and be in many places quickly, than the greenfield and mechanically mass-produced sleeping cities. So the intuition is right. And if we had to choose with what's available, either this kind of concrete mega building or the garbage spill cluster, I also would choose the historic city and center, and that's where postmodernism started. But it's not. It also wouldn't be, if we now compare what we could deliver, a kind of spontaneous order, which is more adaptive to the actual needs, because with the historic center, you have preconceived elements. They're nicely ordered, they create a nice ensemble and city, but the buildings are too small, the buildings didn't have enough variety between buildings, and we can deliver variety between buildings without collapsing into garbage. We can make larger variety, but have gradual transformation from one type to another, or make them similar in interesting ways. So basically, because the attraction is going to the best we've got, but we have something much better we can deliver. That's my response. And so
is it, so would you say, is it impossible for the two to coexist in the same place?
Oh, yes. I mean, look, when I would make a new place, I mean, we're also learning from some of those features of the historic city. For instance, the focus on the void spaces, on the plazas and places and streets as spaces, rather than only at the buildings, and the in-between has no shape. No, we also want to shape the space, the urban space, and not only the buildings as object. And sometimes the buildings as object have to retreat into a framing surface to focus on the space. There's lessons we can learn. Also the variety, and there are different types of cities, more monumental and more intricate, with small alleys and small surprising plazas, and we can learn from that. But again, as I said, maybe we have to do it on a different scale, we have to do with more variety. So there's no lack of learning, and that was the whole period of postmodernism was about. I wouldn't recite, but there's things like loggias, where you have between the street surface in the outdoor and the indoor, you have a covered buffer zone, for instance. Features like this we can pick up on. And when we did the city for praxis, we have in Italy and Sicily, you also learn, some of the features of the historical buildings, they are better adapted to climatic conditions. In the modernist period, we could just kind of do a glass box everywhere and inject mechanical power to heat or cool, whereas in the traditional architecture, you had to be more. You had to try to develop comfortable conditions without having mechanical burning through huge energy, because you couldn't do that. So you make things like wind towers to ventilate out the heat. You have shading, covered place shades, make the streets very narrow because they're shaded, self-shading. And all the things in the modernist period, a lot of these subtleties, adaptive subtleties, were kind of left behind, not required. Now with the sustainability conscientiousness, they're coming back, but also they give character and identity. And therefore, in different climates where you are. In the tropical, you have always these kind of roof overhangs. And oftentimes you don't even have enclosure. You're not in closed spaces. You're just covered, and because the wind, whatever wind there is, should breathe through freely. And so we can work with these conditions, but now on a different scale, and combine them with different requirements. So it is understood that there's this kind of being drawn to these older patterns, and we can integrate them. So I have this research paradigm learning from the vernaculars, because we can learn how, because there has been hundreds and thousands of years sometimes of kind of incremental adaptation to climatic conditions. And it's a bit like the biomimetic research, where engineering solutions go out into nature, because a lot of organisms have developed intricate and surprising solutions to problems, which we can learn from. And similarly, I would argue we're learning from the vernaculars and the historical architecture, because we have to relearn it, because these were intuitively discovered through trial and error, and they're not written scientific analyses. But of course, we can't take it over one-to-one, because, as I said, we have slightly different requirements now, particularly on this level of scale. But I feel I'm think, and my the responses we get with our work is that the kind of love and sense of comfort and energy people get when they walk into a historical city, we can solicit a similar response with our buildings and cities.
Yeah. Does parametricism ever come up with like columns, for example, or it does produce, because obviously they were solutions to problems from a natural scenario as well. The human mind is a natural scenario, isn't it? It's like, okay, we want a slanting roof, we want an overhang, right? We need to prop it up with something.
We work with slanted rooms. There's drainage. There's also vaulting, a lot of vaulting. And the interesting thing is that when we do vaulting, we're not in the old days. It was only possible if you have a full symmetrical condition, because if you vault, you have the forces. You rely on an equilibrium. If it is more a freer form, an irregular form, then, for instance, traditionally they wouldn't know how to equilibrate this, and you have differential settlements. You wouldn't know how to dimension the foundation. The whole thing will crack up. Now we can use vaults, and we can make them more adaptive to site conditions, to the requirements of spaces and rooms. We don't need repetition and symmetry to the same extent, but we like walls. Walls are very efficient because everything is in compression, and material is much stronger in compression. And so that's contemporary research. So parametricism moved on to what I call tectonism, which is still parametricism, but it is absorbing many more, let's say, computational engineering logics and science, and more subtly integrate that as well. And these are often nice logics, because they bring out typical forms which have a coherency, and also they relate back in a lovely way to some historical models. For instance, you have a vault, and when you place the stones, there's a certain pattern. Or if you have kind of reticulations or ribs, like in the Gothic vaults, this is actually quite efficient to make the overall structure lighter, but still equally stiff. And these ribs pick up a certain pattern and nearly give a kind of ornamental character to the space. So when we, in the stage of tectonism, it affiliates becomes even more akin to traditional structures. Because what connects them is this idea of a adaptive discovery process, except that now we have more degrees of freedom and versatility, and there are more constraints in the old days. But the Gothic cathedral is a wonderful structure, and the ribbing pattern is beautiful, but the bays repeat, so you constrain to that. What if your church opens up, and each bay and ribbing becomes larger, and the profiles become deeper, and the columns therefore become heavier, the forces become to the outside become larger? That's the way we would do. So we have this kind of and when you look back at a project like this, you see it's as beautiful, maybe perhaps more beautiful than the Gothic, because you can see the more intricate adaptive structure. The organism is more complex. It's about, if you compare a worm to a snake, the worm has an elegant form, but it's segments. You don't know where's the front, where's the back, top, bottom, and the snake has this kind of nice tessellation, which is very different on the bottom, the sides, the top. There's a front, the back, and there's more intricacy and also superiority. You know, if you put this snake into a contest with the worm, we know who wins. And that's the way I would compare a more simple version of an architecture and a more sophisticated one. It looks the way it looks because it adapts better and is more optimized. For instance, if you look at the traditional walls and arches, they're semicircles. So it's easier to install. But a paraboloid arc, inverted commas, not an arc, form, is a much more optimized form.
Really?
Yes.
But it's not.
The semicircle has problems. It's easier to make. That's why the compromise is then the kind of pointed arch. If you go from the semicircular arch to the pointed arch, you approximate more closely the paraboloid. But it's still not the optimal form. You find the optimal form if you take a chain and you hang it, and then you invert it.
Okay, right.
And that's not a semicircle. So we work with these more optimal forms. Now they have a subtle, more elegance. You know, they're more optimized and they're more subtle. They're very coherent. They're mathematically organized. The physics generates them, and we are not hampered by the restrictions of the builders, who might have been able to do a paraboloid, but it was also not. You know, how do you draw that? The semicircle, you just have a compass. They didn't know. And also, if in the semicircle, you can make each of the stones the same. In the paraboloid, the angle keeps changing. It's harder, and so on and so forth. So that's where we have this kind of, we're moving from the worm to the snake. and that's, but when you look back at a coherently designed, you know, there is this kind of Sagrada Familia, or the work of Gaudi in some of his later works, which has this character of the more sophisticated. You have to imagine stripping down all the ornament and crustaceans. These are more sophisticated versions of, let's say, kind of basilica form already, the first glimpses.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're using AI in a large way now, and it must be an incredibly exciting prospect. I mean, I use it in a very simple way, and it blows my mind continuously. But in parametricism, it must be just unbelievable, because, and in fact, it must be working faster than the whole office could work on this idea of emergent designs, presumably.
Well, yes, there are different types of AI, let's say. Of course, we worked with algorithmic and computational design. That was the biggest revolution. But what you can, and we had a lot of tools of form finding, the kind of physics simulations. As I said, the chain model inverted, but not only in the simple arc, a three-dimensional chain network. So we had all this. Now, when it comes to AI, the image AI, everybody was so excited about that part. Yes, you can accelerate, but you rely on the body of work to train up the AI. And some of the more sophisticated versions, which I call Tectonism, there isn't enough out there for the AI to pick that up, but we have trained our own AI, feeding it with these examples, and then it can accelerate that. Yes, you can shortcut in the form finding. And it is also lovely, creative, when you can interbreed different prompts and different references and images and allow it to kind of compose something more complex. But yes, it is relying on what has been out there. And so we also have to target and can train up the networks so that it can learn the most sophisticated versions. And then, of course, it speeds up enormously.
Presumably, though, it can study nature in an infinite way.
Yep.
And so in a way, there is a lot of unmined data for producing parametricism.
Absolutely. And you know, in an interesting way, if you step back superficially, it is really happening. If you Google AI and architecture, You can see where the desire is, what people would like to design and build. It's all parametricism, basically, 80% of it. In the real world, the planning constraints, the difficulty of the construction industry. I mean, our firm, we're doing it, but you still need a bit of a special occasion, a slightly increased budget. So, and then with all the constraints, particularly in the advanced countries where buildings should be inconspicuous, there's always neighbors who complain, there's always politicization. So developers try to be as inconspicuous as possible. So that hampers a little bit what is really happening. But what I love with the AI revolution is you can see where the desires are for all the young architects who play with that, and all the amateur enthusiasts. They want something which looks much more like parametricism. And so yes, that's very encouraging. But one also has to the shift from parametricism in this more sophisticated version of Tectonism requires higher coherency and rationality requirements. It's more particular. And yes, we can train it, but we have to train it. And you're quite right. You can also train it on natural formations. And that's just, it's very productive. But it's not an automatic, because it relies so much on what you feed it with. And if you want something novel and different, and we don't have enough to feed it with, then we have to first generate these samples to then let the network learn that, and that's what we're currently doing.
I think that's my overarching experience with AI is that I often find myself using it to create a novel thing based on a series of parameters in a way. So it seems to be quite good at that. If you said like, this is a bicycle and this is how you pedal it. Yeah. Can you apply that to hot air balloons or something? Yeah. It would know how to sort of like.
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly creative, and also the result has coherency. I mean, when we first discovered it, was also very exciting. There was been kind of development process up to this where you can see some potential, but the results were incoherent. The buildings were not properly sitting. The perspective wasn't right. The light and shadow wasn't right. But that has been overcome. So now you get a kind of something quite novel and different. But you can see it's a building. It sits, has a good orientation. Light and shadow play on it in incredible ways. So you look at it, you could actually model it. So it's an image of a coherent object. Wonderful. But it lacks, most of these still lack the coherency of the kinds of objects we're designing, which have then not, where you have to get these curves and rhythms. There's more interacting, there are more coherency requirements, which the models they don't have enough resource to reproduce. And that's where we at the moment, where we are generating these sample sets and generating synthetic data actually through various optimization algorithms, which are computationally burden heavy. But once we've trained up the model, we can reproduce these results quicker, maybe not with 100% accuracy, but good enough to use and discover and generate options. So that's definitely, it's an accelerating machine, but it's also, as you said, a creativity machine, because you can mix in prompts. We would say, for instance, let's say, take a kind of system of walls and tensile structures, but inject the fluidity of some kind of a landscape formation. So the model will be feeding images of 2 or 3 character types, which usually had so far been separate domains. And this kind of meshing and hybridization is a very nice technique of innovation. Also in nature, it's kind of recombination. And we had that by hand. We often were thinking like this. This is a concept we discovered and worked at heavily in the 80s and 90s, what you call generating hybrids, chimeras. But to do that by hand is kind of quite clumsy and difficult.
Do you think that parametricism or tectonism
Yeah.
will be the next period of architecture? Because when I think about AI and I think about technology being able to produce these designs, this is now a reality, and it wasn't 25 years ago, and it never was historically ever. So presumably, the world of architecture will converge on
I hope so. It should converge. I mean, it's best practice. I'm sure of that. It shows that how we flourished and grown and how many competitions we win. The competitors not necessarily have the facility, don't have the rigor, the tools. I mean, it is hard to build up. We've been able to do it because we have, for 30 years, I have a direct relationship with the post-professional 18 months degree here at the AA in London, Architectural Association School of Architecture. We had 15 years of working with teams and a masterclass in Vienna, Yale, Columbia University, Harvard University, and not only me, many of our staff teach, for instance, with the University College London. These are our kind of research department. We have internal research departments, so we have which is very unusual for architectural firm, but we are on the large side of firms. So we have about 10% working on research, people who are doing PhDs and writing scientific paper and reading scientific papers to translate into new algorithms. So with that, it's not so easy for everybody to imitate, but it becomes easier and easier. There are a lot of tools where plugins are made available. Endless YouTube tutorials. Students can pick this up, so it's spreading. That's very important. There's ways of allowing many and nearly everybody to participate in these skills. And now with AI, making it even easier. Also to write plugins and scripts. It's so easy now with Gemini to do a web app and have an algorithm. You don't have to know how to code. So that will help enormously, I think, to converge. And it will also converge because we need a more open discourse and be more critical of each other. But the, let's say, functional pragmatic benefits. So you can use AI to make it on organic form. But the tectonism form would be optimal. The materiality, so if you do something less rationally, first of all, you look at it, it's difficult it looks a bit kind of odd and amorphous and arbitrary. And the one which is optimized, they get a sense of, this settles. It's varied, but it's also has coherency, but also it's maybe the material cost, the amount of cement you need, it's maybe 50%. The steel you need, the reinforcement is maybe down to 20%. And eventually this will come out as cost advantages. So I think the convergence will happen through that. The engineering disciplines are also now much more aligned. If you do a beam and you do a straight extrusion, there is a lot of excess. You would have to perforate it. It should swell in the middle if it's in bending, and thickening in another direction at the edges. And the extrusion is only rational as long as it's mass produced. But if you anyway laser cut and robotically weld the piece, do the optimized version. And that means some of these rectilinear, and if you then have a beam in a building, and they should all be kind of subtly different. And it is more beautiful, it is more economic, and I would think that therefore, unless there are barriers to continuous rationalization, like planning or like a dysfunctional discourse, where people insist, no, don't tell me what to do, don't criticize me, I like what I like. I mean, this kind of attitude, a bit backward attitude in our field oftentimes. If these barriers would come down, and a more driven market process would do that, you would have this convergence.
It's just making me think, actually, that because, I mean, it's hard to gauge this, but a lot of people say AI is moving so fast that, in 5 years' time, there's all kinds of people predicting very crazy things in 5 years' time. I don't know whether it's true or not. It's very hard to gauge. But when you apply that to design and architecture, you can imagine that in not too distant future, a computer could come up with the perfectly optimized design for any situation, could it?
Well, I mean, we still need an author to take responsibility. We are becoming, we are not the ones who execute and make 100 individual decisions on any corner. We set up systems, we set up metrics, criteria of selection, and we explore a much more wider range of options this way. And we evaluate these options through metrics, through comparisons. We have evolutionary algorithms, yes, but you need expert interlocutors, which also translate the requirements of a client of a site into which systems are relevant. What are the priority criteria? Which metrics and what range of a metric? Do I optimize to 99%? And therefore compromise a number of other factors, or is 90% good? There's kind of, let's say, decreasing, let's say there's marginal utility to go from 95. It's no longer worth it. So these are judgment calls. And the judgment calls have to come from people who know and have been working with these systems. So these systems are very important. I don't even see that we have shrinking staff. Because if you think about, same with the computational revolution, our productivity per person has been monumentally increased, but it didn't go into reducing staff and reducing, let's say, design fees relative to construction budget. Because investing more in design means you have less cost in construction. Because you can weed out all the clashes, you can optimize further, and also in terms of the benefits. So if you think of a cascade, the final value of a building is its utility, the benefit, what it facilitates and allows for. So for instance, of a company like us, we would always go for the better building. The cost of leasing a building in the overall cost equation of a service firm, financial or other, or architectural engineering or anything, is relatively marginal. The real cost is staff and salaries. So if we stuffed our people into a building, which means that don't see each other, don't interact, we're missing the point, just to save some bucks. But and the construction cost, therefore, if you develop something more beneficial and we can demonstrate this, it's worthwhile investing more. But relative to fees, so construction costs can still grow relative to other costs. Particularly if land costs come down, then we have the land costs are politically created. But the planning cost, the design cost, relative to the construction cost could also increase for the overall equation be more beneficial. It will be more economical to invest more in design, particularly if we now have new tools where we can do more. I mean, for instance, the decisions which we are making for our clients, or the clients can make on the basis of, are way more secure, way more tested with many alternatives. We give them also way more opportunity to appreciate what they might be getting. Photorealistic, immersive environment. They can see what they get. They can imagine, will that work, won't that work? They get a BIM model where everything is kind of counted, and where we can kind of change parameters and see the cost implications. So the more investment in the planning process, as I said, also less delays on site, because things don't fit and you have to debuild to rebuild, clash detection. There's so many elements of the productivity gains where it's worthwhile, which leads in a way to more design. Always is better, but you also have to have more design, just to think of more design makes no sense. You have to have more opportunity to improve. And that's what these new systems bring. So I'm very confident that we won't see slashing of staff, but everybody much more productive for the benefit of the product and for the overall cost benefit and particular cost benefit equation of these products.
Something I've noticed with AI
Yeah.
is I've already got a kind of form of fatigue about it. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, my wife's doing a new website. She makes very high-end sort of upholstery things. And she's doing a new website. And she showed me, she said, look at this. This is amazing. I can point it at one of my pillows and say, put that pillow in another scenario. And I get all these free pictures. And my instant thought is, be careful, because so can everyone else. Like, and when you're trying to make yourself slightly different, if you're aiming at a very high-end market, there's going to be, I think there's going to be a sort of a bit of a revolution against this kind of stuff, because people are going to notice it. I already notice it. I notice it in an email now. If I get a whiff of the fact that an email that's sent to me is AI, I ignore it straight away because I'm thinking that's lazy. So I'm not. But sorry to butt in. But in your line of work, it's going to become a very, very deeply intricate part of the design process, especially in Tectonism. And you run the risk, I suppose, of having this kind of sameness, because the AI is gonna conclude, it's going to do exactly what you want, and it's going to do the same for everyone. It's going to do exactly.
I'll dispute. That's not my experience. It's actually more versatile because the conditions are never the same. Every building is unique with respect to place and purpose, and the previous paradigms couldn't make it so. They were relying more on repetition and then stuff it in anyway. So I don't see that. Yes, there is more coherency. It's a bit like they're all proper organisms. And before you had kind of defunct or ugly or semi-resolved organisms, but we will have the endless forms of nature. So I wouldn't see sameness, because if you rigorously do that, there will be, and you have more choices. For instance, now with these new tools like Xfigura, you're not relying on one model. You have all the models, and you can combine them into a network. And for each thing, you choose a different model. And so you have more calibration. And then we just did a meeting yesterday, somebody else developing a tool called Verso, where you really design workflows, and the designer gets much more ability to select models, to chain models, to loop back with metrics into new prompts and the structured. So it becomes more sophisticated. So there's always a curve where we onto the next thing, where others just getting familiar with what has been rolled out. So I'm not worried that we're kind of, it's healthy to have good competition, and that these things are easy for everybody means we're moving on to the next stage, and we don't be lazy. I don't think that fundamental principle of a competitive alertness and continuous innovation changes. It isn't that, the AI tools keep evolving, the way you work with them, deploy them. We also have proprietary, let's say, networks, which we're training. And so it's a lovely continuous race, and it does allow for now, which I endorse, younger firms and newcomers to break in and catch some of the markets. Now, their limitation is then in the realization. So they would then have to find somebody they can be in the front and very competitive with us. In the downstream, they have no chance. We believe that we are more competitive even in the front end, because here's a small team with 3-4 people. Yes, they have the energy and they're young, they're just out of school, they can do it. But we have a research team of 15 people, and they're also still very young, and they have more resources and more stamina to focus on that. So I think I'm excited by it. I'm not worried. We're at the head of the curve continuously and will stay so.
Last question.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up soon.
Sure.
Bring it back to free cities.
Yeah.
because you are the most, well, you're a very prominent architect in the Free Cities movement. You are, there aren't many architects really, but so I'd love to hear your opinion on whether or not you think we need a kind of, we need like, should you, when you walk into a free city, should you know it's a free city? Should you, from the design of it, should you understand, I'm in a free city? And should that be something that free cities, you know, use and connect with each other over? Because this is a new iteration, certainly, and it's a response to the old world as well.
It's a very good question. I like this question. I think my intuition is to say yes. Because there's something they share which most places don't share. They basically have more chance to be the outcome of an intricate self-organization process, where degrees of freedom imply more degrees of rational choice and proper articulation of interests and purposes and value. And that will come through. And I think the parametricism tectonism paradigm would come into play. But what we, in the real world elsewhere, it can't come into play sufficiently. It comes into play in one plot, and next door is something else. And that doesn't add up. I mean, we have one exception, a very rare exception, where we did a so-called unicorn island in Chengdu, where we did about 1 million square meter and designed 25 buildings on different scales and different programs, including residential offices, public spaces. And that's the kind of thing which, with many talents, that is unique and rare. But the private city could be like that. Maybe even more diverse. So because there could be multiple authors coming in. The point here would be that the authors, the different architects will come into play. There should be at least a subset. They should be curated of being those who operate at the frontier of the field and not a random selection. That would be required. If you make a random selection and you bring a minimalist and then you bring kind of postmodernist and then you bring kind of neoclassicist and then you bring a high-tech person, you get a jumble sale. And that would make it indistinguishable from any other place. So that's what I would feel. So and that means also that although the underlying programmatic order might be intricate and synergetic, you don't sense it, because you now have the high-tech building next to the client of the high-tech building wants to be next to the client of the neoclassical building, and they are next to each other, fair enough. But they wanted to be so close to each other and have things to do and things to share, and maybe want to share space in front of them, that you don't get a sense of.
And could you create two places, one very much along parametricism lines, another along a classical layout, but still observing some of the traditions of a growing city? Could they still have the same, would you still have the same understanding from that?
Well, you could have somebody who wanted to have a range of classical, and the problem with, if you wanted to have a Renaissance, let's say Baroque style layout, that was the first time you had these, let's say the Renaissance style with the ideal city. They were pure geometric forms. If you work like this, then you end up with the problem of forcing everybody into a diagram. What might be more successful to have it more like, evolve it like a medieval city, which has more pliability and less preconceived structure. If you wanted something, and there were in the 19th century urbanists like Camillo de Cité who kind of described that and made that a semi-conscious effort to do something which has more this adaptiveness and variety. Something like this I could imagine, and you will get a sense of coherence and you get a sense of adaptive versatility. The only issue I would have with that is that it's still the range of variety which this would probably lead to is more limited. the range of scales you would allow to come. So then you end up, for instance, with somebody wanted to have a bigger building, you end up where you have 5-6 buildings facade wise, but internally they're all connected. Now that's, I find, slightly disorienting. It's a bit like that, the Beatles movie where they all walk into a terrace house and then inside they have this huge connected pleasure land. Now, when you come from the outside, you don't notice that this is pleasure land. And that what I find there's a kind of legibility dysfunction. And we could be more, we could have an equally coherent thing, but you would more realize and notice, and become more transparent, what are the different conditions and players in your city, but without a sense of disjunction. That would be, so I don't quite believe, I know that, people in the libertarian movement, and I explained it, I don't blame them for going for the historical models, because they have that sense of place, identity, and coherence. We have nothing else in the real world at this point to go for.
I suppose we
have visions and we have models. Unicorn Island, it's a cluster beautifully on a lakefront with startup companies. It's a kind of incubator. That's why it's called Unicorn Island. This is a place where they're supposed to generate unicorns. And I would say it's a good approximation. It's a first approximation, a vision. And it errs on the side of being maybe overly integrated and coherent. I mean, you say but there's a lot of variation as well. There's versatility and unity, and a sense of place. So I could recommend it. I would say compare that to a historical place. What you find more exciting, where you could project the kind of knowledge economy hub you wanted to create. And I would say, if anything, what I'm really envisioning is something where you get a bit more variety still, particularly if you have to grow further, you would have. And that would be a multi-author, what I call a multi-author ecology. Because also multi-entrepreneurial ecology, a synergy cluster, which forms and emerges through kind of spontaneous evolution, which needs not only the entrepreneurial decisions, where to place and who to be next to and what internal offerings, but how do you articulate that and make that, that's where the expertise of architecture comes in, to really represent that and make it happen. And I've seen enough, and we've made many experiments, it would give you a sense of identity, sense of place, sense of coherence. And you could say, yes, this is one more of those free cities.
It probably would make sense, because free cities are a frontier space that you should use frontier technology.
You should be 21st century. Yes. My argument has always been the kind of freedom we're craving for and asking for, and the degrees of economic freedoms we need now, we never needed them so badly, because of all the opportunities we can exploit with those freedoms. And so the overregulation, the politicization and planning was never a good idea, but it was relatively viable and feasible in the 1950s, 60s under mechanical mass production, where capitalism itself structured itself into big bureaucracies. The market was squeezed out and substituted by relations of allocation within big vertically and horizontally integrated corporate agglomerates. That world is gone. And they then had built a kind of modernist company city, company development, and so that was with different times. We have the computational revolution, the flexible specialization, network society. We need more degrees of freedom than ever before, and therefore I think to express that, we should also express the frontier, 21st century everything. And the 21st century everything, we need degrees of freedom which were never existed, not even in the 19th century. Sometimes are nostalgic about.
Patrik. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
That's a lovely place to end. I'm a sucker for old style architecture, but I fully understand what you're saying, and that an identity would evolve from that. And it is an important aspect of the whole movement, is to have an identity, so people know what this thing is. And not only is the frontier appearing, but the technology to create anything, it appears. I mean, you talk about designing beams that have a little kink in the middle. You know, this would have been a mistake 50 years ago. This is now something that you can actually print, or you can design.
Absolutely. 3D printing, for instance, open up the design space. Before you just had to extrude a profile. You know, so that means the fabrication was constraining the forms. And now you can optimize and then 3D print or laser cut and laser weld. You can make every, in a cladding, you can make every panel different. So you can make a tessellation which registers the concave, convex, the flat curve, the tight curve, where the elements become smaller, like the tessellation on an organism. And when you look at it, you can sense the intricacy, the intelligence. And I think we sense that as something we respect and trust and want to be part of. If you're in front of two buildings, one is kind of thrown together semi-randomly, and here's something which is intricate and kind of complex in order. You say, this could be dangerous, disorienting, and there's a sense of trust.
I think it's also
and appeal. What does appeal? I mean, the aesthetic sensibilities, in a way, kind of intuitive shortcuts. And if you're well attuned and you have the right aesthetic sensibility, similar to moral sensibility, you're attracted to somebody a personality who's functioning well, or a place or an object. Seeing beauty, meaning seeing performance, not calculating through analysis, just an intuitive. We're conditioned, we learned that. You've seen many things, and you kind of, in the end, you know what is good for you, what works. You can read it off the form, you can read it off the superficial markers, and that is this appeal. Every organism, we navigate the world aesthetically always. What attracts us, what repulses us? I mean, it's very deep, very visceral. What a nice smell, a disgusting smell. I mean, they're actually signs of something else. And if you extrapolate from this, all sense of beauty, I mean, you have to relearn the kind of aesthetic values, because now the things which are in the high frontier of high performance look different. You have to learn to love them. And that's also something I reflect. And sometimes if you're wedded to sensibilities from yesteryear's high performance, this nostalgia could hold you back.
Well, I'm also thinking, sorry, we're going to end soon. I just keep thinking of things. One of the things that I don't like about the world of mass production is when buildings are built because they're easy to produce, because each thing, right. But I'm thinking about what you just said about having every single panel made a one-off. That can now be mass produced in a sense. So it's a good use of mass production.
Absolutely, it's good use. I mean, and it's more optimal.
Yes.
For instance, if you had shading elements, brise-soleil elements, traditionally you say, okay, you just use the same element and the same pattern across all sides. But west, south to east, they all need shading, but different. The sun comes in flat, comes in steep. There might also be a building, so you need to sort of, in particular, if it's along a curved wall, it will gradually transform and adapt and change. That's the rational thing. What is also good about it, when you come to the building, you can sense, it's like a compass on an overcast day. So there's the multiple advantages. There's materially more advantage. It's expressively more advantage. It gives you more sense of an intricacy, which is you're more attracted to, and you should be, because it's a less crude and therefore more less wasteful. What is wasteful about the other shading is that you have excessive use of material, and you have insufficient shading or too much shading, and therefore it's too dark and you have to switch a light. I mean, so it's just crude. And so we can do more than, we're not stuck in this crudeness, but a lot of our colleagues haven't yet realized that.
Well, it would have
or they don't have the compass. They're still stuck with this crudeness because that's all they've got.
It would have been arguably too expensive before as well.
Before it was too expensive.
Yeah.
And even difficult to calculate.
Yeah.
Now we have scripts where we can simulate the sun exposure onto a surface. That is a differentiation. It could be a color map. And then you can kind of align, the script feeds into a variation of the louver, automatically adapting the louver according to the sun exposure conditions. And of course you have to set up the system. So that's a choice. The choice is not I'm deciding on each louver, but I'm deciding on a way of measuring sun exposure. Okay, that's more or less given. And how there are many, many different ways in which I can make these louvers express them. Individual elements, lines, which go from horizontal to vertical, or shingle-like, so these choices still remain. And I can make it into the kind of 90% range of optimal in many different ways. And then there's still creative choices. Which system and I have then other criteria by which, okay, I'm doing it, but I'm doing it timber because in my neighborhood there are a lot of timber buildings. I want to be kind of harmonizing with them. And so I make this connection rather than, and I could have used stone, I could have used metal. They have different price points. But again, there's a range. So there's a lot of creative choices still too. And the choices are kind of which systems to apply and which kind of, whether I should include the overshadowing of neighboring buildings. For instance, then suddenly the louvers thin out because I don't need them here. And then once the environment was built, at least I'm encountering the facade and say, why is this? Okay. Which gives you inference potential, gives you information. You look at this facade and you see what's around it, represented in the facade. That's the kind of idea where I feel, and now you don't have that, because nothing has, the decisions are sort of arbitrary, disconnected, so they don't tell you more. I want everything you encounter to tell you more. The visible tells you about what is not yet visible, but might empower you to know. So these are the kind of advantages of this way of working. And in nature you have that. Every dumb bird can find its way in an environment because where the plantation, where the water flows, is where the vegetation is different. The north face of a mountain is different from the south face. The vegetation thins out and the rock crops up. And so you know what to expect where. And then in these conditions, different creatures, flora and fauna, adapt to these. And so this logic and coherence and the rule-basedness helps every creature to find their way. Whereas in a garbage pile, there's no reason, rhyme, or logic to follow. And so I want the city to be as intricately ordered so that everybody can orient. And we are more bright and faster learners than birds.
It's the eternal battle between bottom up and top down, isn't it? It's fascinating to hear it in the context of architecture, though, because I see it in daily life. But it's great to think that you're actually trying to apply this to that field, because it can be applied to every field or every job.
Everything is a research effort. I mean, we're doing this with universities, with students, to explore it, to develop it. Then the next level is PhD explorations, bring the argument. The next is internal research department. And then finally, 10 years later, we're rolling out some of that. So it's not instant. And but the pleasure is with the new tools, AI, and some of these ecosystems around Grasshopper and plugins. We do the research, and not everybody has to go through it. So it takes 10 years to develop, but it maybe takes a year to condense into YouTube videos and plugins, and then millions of end users can pick it up and get used to it within a few weeks, let's say. That's the way this spreads.
Well, I've no doubt it will spread. now you've articulated it. Many thanks for
All right, my pleasure.
Spending some time. I need to go back away and digest this now. But
okay, great.
Many thanks.
My pleasure.